I want to start my comments with something one of our young future farmer leaders said when he, from my district, said when he was here visiting the Capitol. He said, you know, there's good and bad in everything. Many of the changes in agriculture over the last few years have been praised as advances and improvements, but when we look at the big picture, we also see a shadow with those changes. Industrial agriculture, which is a part of our agriculture, has pushed many small and medium-sized farmers out of farming. Last year, 400 small farms were lost. Our streams, lakes, and waterways are filling up with chemicals and sediment. People are leaving the land, and farming is becoming more and more dangerous. We hear more and more about letting our policy be guided by science, but science is multifaceted and dependent on asking the right questions with the right perspective. I'm willing to accept that my ideas can have a downside to the things I support, and I think the best side of the democratic process helps us with that concern. We work things out in committee and on the floor. We must work together to get it right. But although there have been overtures and there have been talk about reaching out to our side in an effort to try to show that we want it all, I've not seen that it's always inclusive, nor can it be. And I'm going to talk about some of my concerns, some of which I've mentioned, and about what was left out of this bill, why I think that might have been the case. I don't want to fault Chair Hamilton, as for the most part he's been encouraging all sides to put their bills forward. However, as I've experienced in the past, many of my ideas for advancing what I would call the big picture in agriculture don't get a hearing. I've introduced bills that would eliminate certain chemicals that are harmful to pollinators. We know without pollinators there are many plants we depend on that can't produce the food we rely on. Caring for pollinators provides a context for the big picture, recognizing the need for diversity and the role nature plays in making the systems of nature work. I've introduced bills to educate young and beginning farmers in new ways and provide them with financial assistance. Also bills to train college students interested in learning about organic and sustainable farming. It seems to me that for some reason, bills promoting organic and sustainable practices are a threat to conventional ag, and it would seem my proposals are undermined or pushed aside. I've introduced bills promoting organics and organic production to meet the growing demand for organic products. We are now having to import organic corn from places like Romania to meet the demand for organic chickens. The last few sessions, I've introduced bills that would establish a food council for talking about health, food production, and the environment all at once, so we could look at the big picture. The Commissioner of Public Health released a study explaining that our health and the cost of health care are related to the environment we live in and the hazards around us in both rural and urban Minnesota. From cancer to obesity and diabetes to asthma and autism, we are making ourselves sick. But it seems that it is a discussion that we don't really want to have. I do want to acknowledge that there are a few things in this bill which do show Chair Hamilton's willingness to hear and include some of our ideas, although without funding them. You will find mention of Forever Green, an initiative I introduced several years ago that funds University of Minnesota research on perennials and cover crops that can be money makers for farmers, at the same time protecting the soil and water. We heard excellent testimony in committee from brilliant young researchers who described their work to use plants instead of chemicals to protect the soil and increase yields. There is a biofuels bill here which looks to encourage cellulosic ethanol production from non-corn organic material in addition to corn stover, and I thank Representative Hamilton for expanding the bill to include that. Before the start of the 2015 session, I attended an outstate legislators forum in Mankato. The Land magazine covered the forum, but made no mention of my being there. Other legislators talked about the need for focus on greater Minnesota and attracting farming ventures to Minnesota. The conversation moved quickly to the MPCA and citizen board decision on the 9,000 cow dairy. Several complained about the long process of approving startups, including a mining operation in northern Minnesota. But Representative Clark Johnson said, we need to get it right, even if it takes a while, and commented how important it was to protect our water. We can't rush through the questions about practices that cast a dark shadow on our environment. Senator Rosen was insistent that the loss of the huge dairy would cost thousands of jobs, and in earlier press statements had alleged that farmers who requested the EIS on the proposed big dairy and managed a 3,000 cow diversified dairy themselves could not be called real ag. I wrote a letter indicating my surprise at this allegation and stood up on behalf of small and middle-sized family farms. My letter resulted in a good number of those farmers calling my office, thanking me and wanting me to tell their stories. One farmer talked about how difficult it was to compete with huge farms, but sad to see what they did to the landscape. He wanted me to know how what was efficient for the corporations was not necessarily efficient for the farmer. Another wanted to talk about buffers and how to make them work and the problems tiling caused because the landscape wasn't suited for corn and soy. He said farmers needed to know how to work with their land, and each landscape was different. Another said he wished we'd never gotten started with all these chemicals. There's really no need for it. I can get just as good a yield with my organic corn as any of them, and they're killing their soil. I remembered a farmer showing me the difference between chemically treated soil and organic soil. The nitrated soil blew away like dust. The organic soil was loose but moist and clumped with organic material. These farmers don't like the Farm Bill because it incentivizes, not this bill, but the federal Farm Bill, because it incentivizes conventional corn, soy, and cotton, and offers no protection to farmers who farm organically or intersperse their crops with cover crops. Another farmer in his 80s said he made a good living on a small, diversified farm with 40 hogs, put his kids through college. A small livestock producer can make it because they don't have all the debt and can take care of the land more responsibly. These giant farms lock you into debt and allow others to take your freedom away from you. It was a mistake for the government to encourage them and to let corporations own farms and own seeds. Another farmer said the reason North American farmers avoided troubles of political turmoil of South America is because we have had smaller, independent farmers, farmer-owned operations, as opposed to big plantations, which were another age's factory farm. My first teaching job was in western Minnesota, in farm country, and farmers were eager to show off their land and were proud of the work they did, and quick to learn from each other. Not all were happy with the ways they were being encouraged to change their farms. Many liked a mix of things, but were willing to try something different. Sugar beets were becoming popular, and a new farmer-owned processing plant had come in, but other farmers were not so quick to change. Years later, I found myself walking on the organic dairy owned by Dave Minar. Dave explained how the birds, the bugs, the manure, the soil, and the grasses and the cows all interacted and worked together, improving the pasture. Dave said he used to be a conventional farmer using chemicals on his farm, but the chemicals made him sick, so he quit and has learned a lot about how nature and its delicate balances can take care of so many problems. Most of us have no knowledge of how the delicate balance of microorganisms work all around us. Without them, we couldn't digest our food. Babies are born with healthy microbes that their mothers shared with them. Scientists who study these things speculate that although we may have 10 trillion human cells in our bodies, we are home to 100 trillion microbes. We have 20,000 genes and 2 to 20 million microbial genes. Most helpful, some potentially could turn on us. This is what makes chemicals, antibiotics, and pesticides so dangerous. We don't know what they are destroying. We don't know the long-term effects. Not only does the big machinery combined with chemicals allow one farmer to farm more acres, but it kills microbes and bugs in the soil. They are clearing the landscape. And as these farm practices and farm work are changed by industrial agriculture, but also how farm life and the enjoyment of farm life has changed over the years. Fewer and fewer people means shrinking towns and closing schools and the loss of a creative society that supported that way of life. Farming is no longer safe for young people. We need sustainable farms and sustainable farming. Farming that does not spoil the water or deplete the soil or deplete human beings. Several bills before the Minnesota House this year have a certain bent to them, which to an onlooker may well have the result of further clearing the landscape of family farmers. Efforts to protect industrial agriculture from having to adjust to the needs of their neighbors, removing of protections for pollinators because they implicated chemical companies. Civilizations started with agriculture, but as we look at many of the first civilizations, they were ravaged not by invading forces, but by overuse and misuse of the soil, a lack of understanding how to repair and regenerate the soil. Soil scientists warn us that we have about 60 years left of good topsoil if we don't do something about soil loss through erosion. Starting in the 70s, farmers have been encouraged to grow as much as they could, ignore surpluses, and focus on selling in the world market. Then they were encouraged to specialize and get bigger. They were encouraged more and more to give control of their farms to the chemical and equipment dealers, signing up with big distributors and committing themselves to overwhelming debt, which in a time of falling prices and an economic downturn becomes unsustainable. Reducing chemical use across the board means reducing the impact of big money on agriculture. Much of federal ag policy is heavily influenced by corporate interests and not in the interests of farmers. Prior to World War II, there were few farmers that farmed with chemicals, and they could be successful. However, after World War II and the beginning of chemical weapons, chemical companies needed to find new uses for their chemicals. They looked to agriculture as a new market for their products. It wasn't until Rachel Carson described what was happening to birds that things began to change. Every step of the way, the rich chemical companies fight at every turn to undo or weaken government controls, claiming that these are industry-tested chemicals that do not harm people. Government agencies and government policies that should protect us are constantly undermined by the powerful chemical industries. I recently read a book, Poison Spring, by former EPA official E.G. Villantios, explaining how powerful the chemical industries are, blocking the EPA at every turn from enforcing or investigating violations of our environmental laws. Departments in the 70s did little more than defend industry, even more blatantly than they do today. President Nixon responded in 1970. He said, "The great question of the 70s is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water? Clean air, clean water, open spaces, these should once again be the birthright of every American," Nixon said. Today, although progress has been made, we remain under the control of the chemical and corporate lobbies that control government policy and hold farmers hostage. The chemical industry has wined and dined farmers over the years, convincing them of easier management and greater yields, and being able to patent seeds to further restrict the independence of individual farmers. We are, however, learning from independent science more and more about how nature works. The Genome Project and the Epigenome Project teach us that nature interacts and communicates in ways that if we learn to listen and observe, we can make peace with nature and put away our destructive chemical weapons and learn to grow all the food we need to survive, and at the same time preserve our soil and our clean air and water. Science, when separated from the big picture, gives us false answers, often shaped by influence and moneyed interests. But science that is integrated with the way nature evolves and the cycles it observes can be used to provide us with food we need and maintain our environment. Supporting farmers in Minnesota is a bipartisan issue, and Chair Hamilton has borne that out this year. We often hear how we support all kinds of agriculture, and I agree, we should. Whether Republicans or Democrats control the ag committees, we've been united in our goal to make sure farmers in Minnesota thrive. However, just like you can't fit everything you might want to eat on your plate at the smorgasbord, sometimes you have to make choices about what you put on your plate or what kind of farming we support on the land. We have seen policies at both state and federal levels that try to address concerns about making sure farmers can continue to provide us food we need. I'm concerned about what appears to be a disturbing trend, dividing farmers and legislators alike. We're told that in order to help farmers succeed, we should support, in quotes, real farmers. And real farmers are farmers that operate bigger and bigger farms. Over the history of farming, we've seen times when farms have gotten big and then gotten small, depending on conditions. But getting bigger is frequently described as a trend that makes economic sense. But economic sense for whom? That's a question that rarely gets asked. Farmers of all sizes I talk to have different opinions. It's my sense those who manage to remain small have fewer risks and are more likely to weather like the wheat stalks that bend with the winds of change. They also appear to me to be able to be closer to the land and more sensitive to how it is used and how use affects their neighbors and the environment. Processors of farm products tend to like dealing with bigger farms and influence policies to make it harder for smaller operations to survive. But we see this trend means fewer people on the land and fewer customers supporting rural economies. It makes me concerned about how we best grow economic development in greater Minnesota. The recent pattern we've seen in the agriculture committees has been unsettling to me. We're encouraging the creation of ever larger industrial-scale operations that may offend their neighbors and aren't going to have the added public benefits of clean and healthy air, water, and soil we see when we encourage smaller farming practices. The future of farming in Minnesota shouldn't be one where we have fewer and fewer farmers acting as stewards of the land. It's a simple notion, but encouraging more farmers is better for everyone by improving our economy and our environment. I have no illusions that my statement here will change our current practices, though it concerns me that more attention is not given to risks we take by continuing them. It is my intent here to give voice to farmers who rarely have a voice, yet contribute to agriculture and our well-being as a state and a nation. Finally, I'm concerned that we not hold up avian flu provisions in the omnibus bill and would like to see them move in a standalone bill. Thank you.